Where do you draw the line between crazy and a sense of adventure? After reading Into the Wild by Jon Krakauer, I now see the line. Chris McCandless was found in the Alaskan wilderness in September 1992, dead at the age of 24. After finding out his father had a second family, McCandless went ballistic and took drastic measures and completely abandoned his sister and parents with no intent of looking back. While most would say McCandless was hurting by the situation and had the right to do what he did, I disagree. Can you imagine what our world would be like if everyone just up and ran when trouble came into their life? There is no excuse for McCandless's behavior and actions, which is why I am against them. In the following paragraphs, you will get a strong sense of where I am coming from. While most readers would have you think that McCandless simply had a huge sense of adventure, the reality is he was just using his family problems as an excuse for his outrageous acts of selfishness. As she studies the pictures, she breaks down from time to time, weeping as only a mother would who has outlived a child can weep, betraying a sense of loss so huge and irreplaceable that the mind balks at taking its measure. This is a quote from Chapter 7 as McCandless's mom grieves. Do you still think his decision to abandon his family was fair? There is no way to justify his actions McCandless didn't want to be held accountable for. Having a sense of adventure is totally different from what McCandless chose to do. I have to question McCandless's credibility here because most of the choices he made throughout the book were questionable, which is why I have used ethos in this paragraph. McCandless states several times in the book that he will never return home, then towards the end of his journey changes his mind. So can he really be taken seriously when he says anything? Which brings me to my next point in my essay. McCandless may have lasted a lot longer than most would think, however he was very ill-prepared. McCandless thought that if he had got himself somewhat started, he would be able to make something out of nothing. Krakauer states in Chapter 16 that Chris carried only 20 pounds of rice with him into the wild. That obviously isn't going to be enough to last him a long time. I will prove this by using ethos. In the book he stated he wanted to prove himself that he could make it on his own without anybody's help. However, there were several times in the book where he regretted not asking people for the help that he knew he desperately needed. McCandless needed more than a lot of supplies that he didn't have. He went out into the wilderness somehow thinking he was invincible because most people would know it is impossible to survive with rice and an old gun. However, he still did it, which is, in my opinion, very selfish and brings me to my final reason in my essay. McCandless was being overly selfish by abandoning his family. In Chapter 3 it states, it was the last time anyone would ever hear from him. Chris's parents had sent letter after letter and heard nothing in response. It made us very worried, his parents stated. By using pathos, I will show you how horribly this affected Chris's family. Clearly his family cared about him because they drove from their home to Atlanta just to find that Chris was no longer there. His mother was devastated and his dad knew he was to blame. That doesn't make it any easier on his family. Chris was only thinking about himself. He gave them no goodbye and no hope that he was going to ever be returning. No problem in your life should ever be greater than your family, and Chris thought otherwise. After reading this book, I have changed my perspective on life. You can never take things for granted and always make sure you think before you act. There is no other way to put it besides simply stating that McCandless was crazy. The excuse that he had a big sense of adventure is absurd. No sense of adventure will make it okay to abandon your own flesh and blood. McCandless was asking for trouble by being ignorant and believing he could do all of this on his own without help from anyone, especially when he was not properly prepared. This will make me stop and think next time I am about to make a quick decision without using my better judgment.